Number 5 on this list is the legend of Wall Hollow Road. Wall Hollow Road is actually quite a beautiful road in central Ohio. It is very long, starting out as a suburb street and then eventually transitioning into a very skinny one-way road in the middle of what feels like nowhere. As you may expect, our legend takes place in the skinny abandoned one-way section of this road. The story says that in the 1950s there was a couple that lived in a home along Wall Hollow Road out in the country. Now, no one is really sure what prompted the husband to do this, whether he had just gone insane or if the wife had done something that he did not approve of, but one evening he totally lost it. He grabbed the axe from the garage and brutally murdered his wife in the attic of their home. The whole story gives me some serious Jack Nicholson in The Shining type of vibes. After he had killed her, he took her body and he buried it at nighttime in the yard. Now, they weren't completely in the middle of nowhere and did have some neighbors in the area. After several weeks of not seeing the wife and strange explanations from the husband, the neighbors called the police and the truth was revealed. The man was then easily tried, convicted, and sentenced to execution. After his death, though, people started reporting seeing him around the area. When they reported this, nobody took it very seriously, considering it had been big news when he was sentenced to death and everybody had heard about it. More and more sightings came out though, and it was always the same story. They could see along the side of the road ghostly apparitions of the husband who was killing his wife. Almost as if the scene was getting played over and over and over again. The locals now swear that if you head down that road and get to the one-way, then it's very possible that you will see the ghost of our murderer replaying the killing of his wife. Number 4 on this list is the Lizard Men. Now, this is certainly a strange one, but honestly it's one of the biggest urban legends that Ohio has to offer. The legend can be traced all the way back to 1955, where it was reported that a traveling salesman spotted these strange looking creatures. Now, this story sounds a little bit ridiculous to me if I'm being completely honest, but apparently 3 lizard-like creatures that are roughly 3 feet tall were standing on their hind legs having a full-on conversation. When the man pulled up to them and couldn't believe his eyes, because it's literally these 3-foot lizards talking to each other, they whipped out a magic wand and then used their magic wand to conjure some sparks, which provided them with enough cover to then run away. Now, frankly, that part of the story sounds a lot more like my traveling salesman buddy was dipping a little bit too deep into the drink, or potentially some other illegal substances. But some of the other encounters that people have reported having with these beings aren't quite as outlandish. In 1972, for instance, a police officer was driving his car by the Little Miami River and in his headlights saw a very large creature sprint across the road and leap off a bridge into the river. He was totally blown away and said that the being was nothing like he has ever seen, painting the picture of a unique lizard-like man when he described it. Throughout the years, there have been a lot more sightings of the lizard creatures by Little Miami River, similar to that of the police officer. Up to this point, there haven't been any deaths or harm that has befallen on the people that have come across this creature, or creatures, so it isn't necessarily too scary, but I had to include it on this list simply due to the amount of sightings that people have had and how popular of an urban legend it is to the Ohio locals. Number 3 on this list is the legend of the Hatchet Man. Back in the 1800s, there was a man named Andrew Hellman who owned and operated a cemetery. One evening, Andrew was finishing up his business outside, and he was savagely attacked by an unknown assailant. The attacker had a hatchet and used it to cut Andrew's body up into little tiny pieces. This clearly wasn't enough for the killer though, who then took all of these little bits of Andrew and scattered them around the entire cemetery. Andrew was a nice man and didn't deserve this at all, and he definitely didn't deserve for his soul to get trapped in limbo like it is right now. Legend says that Andrew's spirit still wanders through this cemetery and has completely lost its mind. People have reported hearing the sound of somebody banging a hatchet on gravestones throughout the cemetery, screaming at the top of their lungs as they do it. It has also been reported that they have discovered hatchet scrapings on the tombstones in this cemetery as if somebody had slammed a hatchet on them as hard as they could. Some locals even believe that Andrew's ghost or Hatchet Man is so far gone that it has begun killing people. That if you are out in this cemetery late at night and alone, the Hatchet Man's spirit will appear, and if you see him, then this is the last thing that you will do, because you will be murdered by the Hatchet Man. Number 2 on this list is Crybaby Bridge. In Ohio, there are actually many bridges that people claim are the true Crybaby Bridge. However, when I was doing my research, the one that I heard the most about was a bridge located in Fremont. The urban legend of Crybaby Bridge was a sad one. As I imagine you've probably guessed by now, this legend includes a baby. It's said that many years ago a mother took her newborn to this bridge. The baby that she had just given birth to was unwanted. Now it's unclear why this baby was unwanted. Was she incapable of taking care of it? Was potentially her partner involved in the decision? That part of the story, it's not known. But what is known is that she took the child and she threw it into the river to drown and die. Then, after standing there and seeing her baby drown down the river, the mother threw herself over the top and killed herself the same way. People think that she killed herself out of guilt for what she had just done to her child, and this is why I think there has to have been some external factor that we don't know about forcing her to do it in the first place. Whatever the reason though, the killing of a newborn like that with the amount of guilt and emotion, it leaves something behind. The people of Utah believe that if you go to this bridge in Fremont late at night and wait there, you will start to hear the cries from a newborn baby coming from the waters below. It is also said by the locals that if you stand there long enough, then you may even encounter the phantom form of that mother. She won't cause you any harm, she will only be looking out over the waters, regretting what she had done to her child so many years ago. Number 1 on this list is the portal to hell. Located in Blue Ash, Ohio, the portal to hell is a very eerie looking drain tunnel that was reportedly used by Satanists to open up a gateway straight to hell. The exact story of how the portal was created, it isn't completely concrete, but for the most part, everybody agrees that a satanic group used part of the tunnel as a meeting ground. It was in this tunnel that they started performing their satanic rituals. They reportedly used this place for a lot of sacrifices and would slaughter live animals down there very frequently. This escalated until they made a full-on portal to hell that nobody is closed. People in the area regularly report hearing screaming coming from down inside the tunnel, with others saying that they've seen strange visuals and movements as well. David Scott and John Stevens, who run a show about paranormal activity, got wind of the portal to hell and had to go check it out for themselves to see if the rumors were true. From what they had heard, there was a demon called the Shadow Man that was lurking deep inside the tunnels near the altar room where the Satanists used to sacrifice the bodies. When they go down into the tunnel, for the first bit, everything is as it should be. It's still super creepy tunnel, but nothing paranormal. Then, as they're super deep into the tunnel, they begin to hear footsteps coming from behind them in the darkness. Being paranormal professionals, they pull out this strange looking electronic device and start asking questions to it. Sure enough, a voice comes back to them. They go on to have a full conversation with this voice and learn that a man named Jake was murdered down here. The voice goes on to tell them that the tunnel is a prison and that they must worship Satan here. It also tells them that the Shadow Man is real and is currently down here with them. The conversation finishes with the voice basically claiming that it wants to leave this horrible place and that it is trapped down here. I'm not sure how real their interaction was with this voice, but with the history that this tunnel has had and the amount of people who have had reported sightings of beings and other odd, unexplained things, something is definitely not right about that tunnel, or the portal to hell in Blue Ash, Ohio.
Starting off this countdown, we have I Know What You Did Last Summer. The 1997 film starring Jennifer Love Hewitt, Sarah Michelle Gellar, and Freddie Prinze Jr., among others, is a classic slasher film. It surrounds 4 young friends who get stalked by a crazy killer with a hook. The film draws inspiration from the urban legend, The Hook, which has terrified kids for ages. The Hook or Hookman is an urban legend about a killer with a hook for a hand that attacks couples in parked cars. Now, over the years, this urban legend has changed a number of times, but the main concept is that a couple go out to a place in the woods called Lover's Lane. While cuddling and doing other things, an announcement comes on the radio. It says a prisoner has escaped an asylum and is on the run. He is a known killer who they call the Hookman because he lost his hand in an accident and replaced it with a hook. Just as this announcement finishes, they hear scraping on the side of the car. The girl is so freaked out that she begs her boyfriend to just drive them home. even though he thinks it's just nothing. Then they arrive home and they notice a bloody hook lodged into the side of their car. Of course, this is just an urban legend, but it may have some roots in real life, like the 1946 Texarkana Moonlight Murders. Basically a series of murders and attacks on young people parked on lovers' lanes in Texas. The killer has never been caught. People were afraid that these were done by the Hookman, and that the legend came to life. But in reality, the Hookman is just one big urban legend and won't come after you or your friends. In our fourth spot, we have Mothman. Chances are you have probably heard of this urban legend. The Mothman originates from West Virginia folklore. Apparently, the Mothman is a large 10-foot tall gray creature with red glowing eyes and wings. On November 15th, 1966, two young couples called the police to report this creature. They said that this large flying man was following their car while they were driving. During the next few days, more and more people reported similar things. The 2002 film The Mothman Prophecies is based off of the 1975 book by the same name. In the film, a reporter is investigating the legend of the Mothman, and it's based on the actual sightings of Mothman that I just discussed. I mean, there's no solid evidence proving that the Mothman is real, so for now, it's just an urban legend. But who knows? Maybe in the future we will learn about these creepy sightings and discover what or who was behind them. Coming in at number 3, we have the Candyman. The Candyman was an urban legend based off of a short story by Clive Barker, which eventually got turned into a movie. Basically, legend states that if you look in the mirror and chant his name 5 times, then you will summon him, and he will appear in the mirror. Similar to, Bloody Mary. The movie and legend scared many when they found out something similar happened to a woman. In 1987, a woman named Ruth McCoy was found dead after 2 men climbed through her medicine cabinet and shot her. The film was inspired by the method of killing and incorporated that into the film. In the film, you see the man with a hook appear through the medicine cabinet / mirror and try to slash people to death. Ruth's death had a lot of people scared. When Candyman featured the medicine cabinet scene in their film, it made them even more scared, making people think that, oh damn, killers can enter my house through the connecting wall and through the medicine cabinet. Not only that, but this whole thing had people believing that the Candyman was real. In our second spot, we have Alligators in the Sewers. The 1980 horror sci-fi movie Alligators in the Sewers is about a flushed away alligator that turns into this massive mutant gator. In the film, the gator gets flushed and ends up living in the sewers. From there, it eats the bodies of small animals. But these animals have been used for scientific experiments, and by eating them, it caused the gator to grow into this massive creature. Then it starts terrorizing the city. Of course, there is an urban legend very similar to the movie. It's probably what the movie was inspired by. Legend goes that a New York couple brought back baby alligators while vacationing in Florida. Eventually, they flushed these gators down the toilet, and the gators made a family of their own in the sewers under the city. Then legend goes that one time a boy was reaching for his baseball that rolled into the sewer grate, and an alligator bit off his arm. Now, let's look at the facts here. This legend and movie had people really believing that alligators could survive in sewers. But here's the thing. Alligators are cold-blooded animals, meaning they can't regulate their own body temperature. In order for them to survive, they need to warm their bodies by the hot sun or a heat lamp. And I mean, I don't think there are heat lamps down there in the sewers, okay? And there's definitely no exposure to sunlight. Without the warmth of the sun, the alligators would eventually die. Also, New York winters can be pretty harsh. They would end up just freezing to death down there. Now, if for some reason they did survive, the polluted water would certainly kill them off. They can't live long in Salmonella or E. coli, which is found in the sewage. And in our number 1 spot, we have The Dead Man's Curve. This 1998 film starring Matthew Lillard, who I love, is about 2 college students who discover that if their roommate takes his own life, then the college will bump up their grades out of sympathy. So they plan to kill their roommate and make it look like a Hate to break it to you, but I don't think colleges are allowed to do that. Either way, this movie gave birth to this urban legend. People really thought that a death could get them straight A's. Other versions of the legend say that the roommate doesn't have to commit suicide, but the school will grant them good grades if their roommate is murdered or if they suffered from an illness and then they died as a result of that. Another variation says that the death must occur in the room or with the roommate. And a student who does not witness his roommate's death only receives a 3.4 average. Honestly, either way, it's just pretty messed up. But it had a lot of people thinking that it was real. Hate to break it to you, but it's not. So keep on studying and earn your grades that way.
Coming in at number 5, we've got sewer alligators. Iconic. I think New York's sewer alligators might have been one of the first urban legends I was familiar with as a kid. Showed up as a gag in a show I was watching or something. But it's a myth that doesn't seem to disappear. Hell, it even has an incarnation in one of New York's most famous pieces of media, Spider-Man. The lizard, anyone? There's something about the possibility of gigantic carnivores living in the New York City sewer system that has captured the imaginations of folks everywhere. Unfortunately, it's a story that begins with irresponsible pet ownership. Back in the early 20th century, plenty of posh people were looking for exotic pets to bring home with them. Why you would want an alligator in your penthouse is beyond me, but the rich and frivolous thought this was a smashing idea. Now, we all know this is a bad call, but hindsight wasn't quite a thing yet back then. So these folks brought baby alligators home and made cooing noises at their tiny green pals. However, they don't stay tiny and cute forever, so when these alligators became problematic, it was common for their owners to ditch them in any way they could. Some chose to flush them, but it's likely that they were too big at that point to fit down the pipes. This resulted in many being tossed down into the sewers at ground level. The legend says that these gators managed to do quite well for themselves in the dank tunnels, feasting on rats, growing up, and finding other alligators to have little alligator sewer babies with. This all came to a head in 1935 when the Times ran an article headlined, "Alligator Found in Uptown Sewer." A bunch of folks had located and killed an 8-footer out near the Harlem River, giving credence to the rumors. From there, the legend was cemented into city lore. The actual probability of alligators thriving in the sewers is next to none, but the believers keep on believing. Coming in at number 4, we've got Montauk Mind Control. SCP fans might recognize that name, Montauk. It's a hamlet at the far east end of Long Island. Because of this, it can be interpreted as the end, which kind of makes sense in that context. Stranger Things fans might have their ears perked up right now too, as rumors surrounding this village at the end of the island are basis for some parts of the show. There's an old military base out there known as Camp Hero. It's been shut down for a while, but there are whispers of some sinister stuff happening way back when. All sorts of top secret classified experiments are said to have occurred from the 60s through the 80s. The kind of stuff that would never go public because it's pretty messed up. It's almost sci-fi inspired, to be honest. Being at the end of the island lent them a fair deal of privacy, which meant the folks at the base could get up to all sorts of trouble. The big one that folks talk about has to be psychic experiments. Of course, experimenting on adults is no good. They're already fully developed and likely haven't exercised their psychic abilities. It's rumored that children were kidnapped and brought in and forced to undergo psychic experiments. They were put through all sorts of extreme tests and trials to see if they could unlock their hidden potential. Was it to create a new type of human weapon? Could it have been for the sake of espionage? Did anything really come of it? It really does smack of Stranger Things, doesn't it? An electrical engineer that claims to have worked at the site says they had alien technology there, which allowed them to turn kids into psychic warriors, which is a lot to claim, especially as it opens up the possibility of alien contact. These days, you can visit Camp Hero yourself whenever you want, as it's been converted into a state park. So maybe go and see if you can sense anything, or maybe even find some alien relics. Coming in at number 3, we've got the Empire State Bermuda Triangle. You're all familiar with the actual Bermuda Triangle, right? You know, the mystical portion of ocean between Miami, San Juan, and Bermuda that supposedly disappears ships, planes, and anything else that passes through? Well, apparently there's a spot like that in New York, sort of. If you ask around long enough, you might hear the tale of the Midtown Bermuda Triangle. In 2008, folks started noticing something odd. All sorts of cars would die for seemingly no reason and refuse to start back up again. It happened so often that people started looking for reasons why. Someone made the observation that all of these shutdowns seemed to be happening within 5 blocks of the Empire State Building. Mechanics got used to driving out, towing the dead cars a few blocks, and having them work perfectly once again. There are all sorts of theories as to why this happens, but the prevailing idea is that radio signals coming from the Empire State Building's broadcast tower were causing some sort of interference. Maybe they were inadvertently screwing with car alarm systems, stopping them from starting. However, this problem seems to have solved itself without anyone really addressing what was going on. So, was there a mysterious dead zone around the Empire State Building, or were folks just reading too far into their car troubles? Coming in at number 2, we've got mole people. We started with some underground reptiles, now let's get to some mammals. Humanoid mammals. Deep below the city, among the many subway tunnels and sewer systems, lives a city of people not accustomed to sunlight. Mole people. Well, probably not actual mole people, it's just a nickname they all got for living underground. In all likelihood, there are plenty of people living under New York. There are over 700 miles of subway tracks, plenty of which are closed off. So there's lots of space to set up a subterranean life. Rumors of these people living below the surface date back to the 1800s when the subway was first being built. The city had done its best to prevent people from settling in under there, but that's much easier said than done. Often subway construction gets delayed when workers come face to face with some of the tunnel dwellers. If someone was trying to run a train through your house, you'd be unwilling to move too. And finally, at number 1, we've got Cropsey. Oh, now this one is spooky. A legend among Staten Island youth, Cropsey is a figure shrouded in mystery. Some say that he was a respected member of the community that went mad after his son died. Others claim that he was admitted into a mental institution, became a janitor, and then started to kill. The origin story changes from person to person, but his actions do not. Cropsey kidnaps and kills children. He's the Staten Island boogeyman. Summer camps and island tours galore love to scare the daylights out of folks by telling them the tale of the killer on the loose. There's even a slasher movie from the 80s that features a Cropsey character. It's called The Burning. But get this, the legend might actually be true. Sure, he's not around anymore, but it turns out there really was a mad janitor who kidnapped and killed children. Andre Rand worked at Willowbrook, a now defunct mental institution on the island. In 1987, Rand was convicted of kidnapping and murder and racked up more charges later on. Did he inspire the legend, or was he inspired by it? We may never know. Rand is currently serving 2 sentences of 25 to life, but it's doubtful he's getting out. There's a fascinating and freaky documentary about the story of Cropsey that came out in 2009 that investigates the events surrounding the legend. Right on. The concrete jungle seems a little more cursed than before, doesn't it? Rent prices aren't the only scary thing out there.
In at number 5 we have Space Mountain. There are a surprising amount of urban legends surrounding this ride at Disney World, which is odd. It is just a ride after all, right? Nothing strange about it. According to legend, one rider was decapitated while on Space Mountain because he supposedly stood up while riding. What an idiot. Now this is only a little bit true. There was a decapitation, but it was on a test dummy, not a real person. No person has ever been killed while riding Space Mountain. However, there is another dark legend that surrounds this ride. According to legend, on Space Mountain you can find Mr. One-Way. Some accounts describe Mr. One-Way as a red-haired man with a red face, with stories stating that he hangs out in the line for Space Mountain. But this differs depending on who you ask. According to video footage, Mr. One-Way will sometimes get onto the ride with other passengers, grabbing an available seat. However, it is said that he disappears right before you reach the final tunnel at the end of the ride. On top of that, there is supposedly a second ghost called Disco Debbie, who is also said to haunt Space Mountain, and according to some riders, she glows in the dark. Very freaky indeed. Coming in at number 4 we have Magnolia Creek Lake. Magnolia was once a thriving riverport town in southern Wakulla County, Florida, which was established all the way back in the 1820s and is now classified as an extinct city by the State Library and Archives of Florida. All that remains of the city is a cemetery, with the last known burial being back in 1859. Magnolia Creek Lane is a narrow road fit for one car at a time south of Montverde on the west side of Lake Apopka. According to legend, the road and surrounding lake is haunted by around 200 passengers who were killed in a train wreck. However, many have attempted to find evidence of this, but none has ever been found, yet the legend continues. Now, while the road appears to be built on an old train track, the only documented railroad ran slightly north of the location. Now, this road is supposedly where all kinds of horrible things happened back in the 1890s, and according to some locals, at the creek that runs to Lake Apopka, you can hear the loud screams in the woods. However, when you get closer, they move farther away. The screams are said to be that of the train crew that died. However, skeptics believe this is actually sound that is being reflected from another place. According to a local, Michelle, she said, I quote, "My cousin went to Montverde Academy and heard about this road that runs off 455 that used to be a railroad bed, and they say that if you go down there at night you can hear ghostly sounds and see eerie shadows of people walking on the road. I don't know for sure about this because I never went there, so it is just what I heard." Coming in at number 3, I-4 Dead Zone. Interstate 4 is a highway in Florida that spans 132 miles, with it running from Tampa all the way to Daytona Beach. Now, the interstate is frequented daily by folks heading to work and those on their way to Disney World. Now, while it is a popular highway, it is also another nickname for it, the Dead Zone, an area where folks need to be particularly careful. This area of the highway has been the location of many accidents, electronic malfunctions, as well as supposed ghost sightings. So why exactly is this spot so dangerous and filled with so much paranormal activity? Well, this is because this quarter mile of highway was built over a grave site, and as we know from movies, a disturbed grave site means bad news bears. It means you're in for a nasty surprise. It means you're gonna die. Don't believe it? Well, oddly enough, on the very first day the new interstate was opened, a tractor trailer carrying frozen goods lost control and crashed directly above the disturbed graves of people who had died from yellow fever. It is believed that around 1,500 to 2,000 accidents have occurred on the highway since 1963, which is a lot. And worse still, many of those accidents resulted in death, and between a 24-month period, there were around 44 car accidents, resulting in approximately 65 people being injured. Some locals fear this area of the highway so much that they actually take a much longer route around it. On top of all of this, back in the 1950s, a young boy was said to have disturbed the graves, and the following night he was killed by a drunk driver. And to add insult to injury, the driver was never caught. Coming in at number 2, we have the Devil's Chair, also known as the Haunted Chair. This is an urban legend hailing from folklore that is attached to a class of funerary or memorial sculpture common throughout the United States during the 19th century. Now, these chairs were known as the mourning chairs for visitors to cemeteries to sit on when visiting loved ones. However, since then, cemeteries have provided benches for similar purposes. Once the original purpose of these chairs fell out of fashion, superstition quickly developed in association with sitting in the chair. For example, some young people dare one another to visit the site, most often after dark or at midnight, or in some cases on Halloween. Stories state that if you sit in the chair at these specific times, something awful will happen, with people fearing that they will be punished. In Florida specifically, the Devil's Chair is located in Cassadaga, Florida, and is a graveside bench in the cemetery that borders Cassadaga as well as Lake Helen. According to legend, an unopened can of beer left on the chair will be empty by morning. Now, in some stories, the can has already been opened, and in others, the liquid is simply gone through the unopened top. On top of that, it is said that the devil will sometimes appear to anyone bold enough to sit in the chair itself. So if you do decide to visit the chair at night and take a seat expecting to meet the devil, just be sure to have a beer in hand ready for him, because it is said that he will be expecting one. As am I, all the time. I would like a beer. Maybe that's why I'm evil. I'm the devil. And finally, coming in at number 1, Legend of the Skunk Ape. Also known as the Swamp Cabbage Man, Swamp Ape, Stink Ape, Florida Bigfoot, and Louisiana Bigfoot, this is a creature that is said to inhabit Florida and is named for its appearance and for its unpleasant odor that is said to accompany it. The ape has supposedly been a part of Florida folklore since the settler period, which is absolutely insane. One of the first reports of the skunk ape in Florida came from the year 1818, when a report spoke of a man-sized monkey or ape raiding stores and stalking fishermen. This became particularly common in the 60s and 70s, with one sighting occurring in 1974 which spoke of a large foul-smelling hairy ape-like creature which was said to run upright on 2 legs in the neighborhood of Dade County, Florida. However, some people were skeptical, including investigator Joe Nickel, who stated that these reports may represent a black bear and that other sightings may in fact be hoaxes or misidentification of wildlife. In terms of appearance, the creature is said to resemble the Sasquatch of the Pacific Northwest. However, the skunk ape is said to be shorter in comparison. It has long patches of fur on the shoulders and arm and is often described as a mottled rusty red colour as opposed to the Sasquatch's brown and black coat. Coming in at number 5, Ghost Taxi. Back in 2011, Japan was struck by a 9.0 to 9.1 magnitude earthquake. It was the most powerful earthquake ever recorded in Japan and the 4th most powerful earthquake in the world since modern record keeping began in 1900. The earthquake triggered powerful tsunami waves that may have reached heights up to 40.5 meters, which is absolutely terrifying. Now, a few years after this catastrophic event, stories of ghosts, specifically ghost taxis, began circulating in areas that were directly affected by the tsunami. However, this isn't new. According to reports, many Tokyoites have been telling stories about spectral passengers since way back when. One common legend is of pedestrians hailing down taxis and asking to be taken to Ayama Cemetery. When they arrive, the driver tells them the price and turns around to collect the fare, but there's no one in the back seat. Very spooky. Now this legend may have some merit, as it turns out the opening of the Chiada line in the late 1960s brought on some interesting problems as it ran directly under the cemetery. Now the legend goes that some of these souls got lost on the trains and they're attempting to get back home via these ghost taxis. It's actually pretty sad. Coming in at number 4, the Regina of Akasaka Road. This is a legend popular among students who have taken a history class nearby Sophia University. Kino Kunai Saka is a hill running past Akasaka Palace towards Akasaka stations and serves as the setting for this dark and haunting legend. I quote, "A man hears wailing while walking down the slope at night and sees a beautiful girl, dressed as if she is from a wealthy family, weeping on the banks of the moat. The man stops to ask her if she's okay and to console her, but the girl continues to weep while hiding her face behind one of the long sleeves of her kimono. While he keeps on pleading with the girl to stop crying, she slowly rises up with her back turned to him and then turns towards him and wipes her face with her hands, as if to wipe away tears. But it turns out she has no face, just a blank slate where eyes, nose and mouth should be. The man screams in fear and runs up the hill as fast as he can, away from the scene, not stopping to look back. He spots a lantern far up the road. Exalted, he runs towards it, although it turns out to be a lonely sober cellar rather than a dwelling. Upon reaching the cellar, he drops to the floor and breathlessly tries to explain what he just saw. The sober seller replies, rather unsympathetically, "Was it something like this?" and waves a hand across his face, after which all his features disappear and the entire area becomes dark. Now there is a name for these faceless creatures. They are referred to as Nopero Bo, or faceless ghost, which are Japanese yokai that look like a human but have no face at all. They are primarily known for frightening humans, but are usually otherwise harmless. They will appear at first as ordinary people before causing their features to disappear. Coming in at number 3, Yuya Kaiden. Yuya Kaiden is a haunting story of Oiwa and Tamiya Lemon, and is about betrayal, murder and ghostly revenge, making it one of Japan's and Tokyo's most famous ghost stories of all time. The legend itself is based loosely on 2 historical characters, with it depicting a woman, Oiwa, who is gradually poisoned by her husband due to the fact that she is having an extramarital affair. It is said that he presents the poison to her via face cream, which slowly eats away at her face, resulting in her having a lopsided and drooping appearance. Now here's where the legend varies depending on which version of the story you are hearing, but it is said that Oiwa either accidentally cuts her throat and curses Tamiya's name while dying, or she is killed by Tamiya himself, or even dies of natural causes. Regardless of the cause of death, she comes back to haunt him when he marries the woman he had an affair with. It is also stated that when Tamiya weds his new wife, he lifts up the veil of his new bride. Oiwa's face appears instead. In shock and out of fear, he attacks her with his sword, halting the apparitions, but ultimately revealing that he has just killed his new bride. It is said that this may be based on 2 real-life murders, ultimately combining fact and fiction. The first involved 2 servants who had murdered their respective masters. They were caught and executed on the same day. The second murder was from a samurai who discovered his concubine was having an affair with a servant. The samurai had the faithless concubine and servant nailed to a wooden board and thrown into the Kanda River. Coming in at number 2, Akamanto/Red Cape. Akamanto, or the Red Cape, is a Japanese urban legend about a masked spirit who wears a red cloak and who is said to appear to people using toilets in public or school bathrooms. Accounts of course vary, but one consistent element of the story is that the spirit will ask the person in the bathroom a question. In some versions he will ask if they want red paper or blue paper, though other versions state a red cloak or a blue cloak, or a red cape or a blue cape. Regardless of what it is always blue or red, and regardless of the colour, no matter what option is selected, the person will always be killed. Specifically, if the person chooses the red option, they will be lacerated in such a manner that their body will be drenched in their own blood. Lovely. If the person chooses the blue option, the consequences range from that of the person being strangled to all of the person's blood being drained from their body. So what you must do is ignore the spirit, run away, or reject both options in order to survive. However, if an individual attempts to outsmart Akamanto by asking for a different colour of cloak or cape, it is said that they will be dragged to an underworld or hell as a result. Author and folklorist Matthew Meyer has stated that the Akamanto has been recorded as a schoolyard rumour since the 1930s. Also more recently in the 2003 video game Castlevania Area of Sorrow, an enemy is featured known as Killer Mantle, which may have been based on the Akamanto legend. And finally coming in at number 1, the Curse of Masakado. Taira no Masakado was a samurai in Japan who led one of the largest insurgent forces in the period against the central government of Kyoto. In 939, during the Heian period of Japanese history, Masakado led a minor rebellion which began when Masakado led an attack on the outpost of the central government in Hitachi province, capturing the governor. This resulted in Masakado becoming the new emperor. Over the centuries, Masakado became a demigod of sorts to the locals, with some even feeling feeling the need to appease his malevolent spirit. Masakado ultimately met his end in a rather grisly manner, decapitated. His bodiless head oddly enough managed to be preserved remarkably well until it was eventually buried. Now, his grave lies in Tokyo near the Otemachi subway station, and it is said that removing or relocating it has been proven incredibly difficult, with many attempts resulting in those being plagued by misfortune. When the nearby Ministry of Finance tried to level the hill after 1923, 14 workers related to the project started dropping dead like flies from accidents or other bizarre incidents. It is said that the curse still exists to this day, with various stories of people becoming ill or dying after the shrine had been messed with. People have learned their lesson though and rarely touch it. It's even said that desks inside the buildings around the shrine are placed so as to not make anyone sit with their back to Masakado.
Coming in number 5, we've got the 13th child. 13 children is a scary enough thought on its own, regardless of whether there's some sort of paranormal activity going on. No matter how you approach it, that's a lot of kids. Imagine babysitting 13 kids. Chaos. Or even worse, imagine popping a baker's dozen out of your nethers. Nightmarish. This urban legend capitalizes on the scare factor of both plenty of children and the unlikelihood of actually managing to birth an unlucky amount of them. It's been said that there is a woman living in the expansive forest of New Jersey's Pine Barrens back in the 18th century. Somehow, this hermit managed to sire 12 kids while living her life in the woods. However, the 13th child was one too many, and she cursed this infant upon realizing she was pregnant. The baby was born a freak of nature with features that only a mother could love, and unfortunately, this mother did not love them. It sprouted bat wings, had cloven hooves, and took on some truly chimeric qualities. In fact, some say that this cursed kid became the legendary cryptid known as the Jersey Devil. Ever since, this child has been terrorizing the surrounding areas, causing all sorts of problems. Imagine the baby from It's Alive, but somehow worse and more long-lasting. After all these years of sightings, a zoo has even posted a $10,000 reward for anyone who can capture the creature. Honestly, $10,000 seems a little low for such a horrid beast, but hey, cryptozoology and urban legends don't have a whole lot of money behind them, huh? Over the years, many famous sightings have been reported. A Commodore visiting a mill to inspect cannonballs claimed to have seen a flying creature and fired a cannon at it to no effect. Napoleon Bonaparte's older brother Joseph claims to have seen it while hunting in Bordentown. And of course, over the years, all sorts of missing livestock has been blamed on the ravenous appetite of this cursed child turned devil. Now, there have been plenty of different explanations concerning the 13th child. Some think the tale is just a result of Pine Barrens boredom, folks telling tall tales to keep their kids in line while living in the middle of nowhere. Another possibility is that outdoorsmen could have been mistaken for the creature by less experienced hikers. See, before bug spray was a hot commodity, folks would cover themselves in mud to keep the mosquitoes off. This could have resulted in some hikers seeing these muddy figures from far away and mistaking them for something else. Or maybe the 13th child was indeed cursed and mutated and enduring. Coming in number 4, we've got the village of Kultara. We've all heard of ghost towns before, old, dilapidated complexes seemingly abandoned out of nowhere. Usually there's a good reason for inhabitants to disappear: economic hardships, depleted resources, or maybe even a curse. However, nobody seems to have a good explanation for the abandoned village of Kultara in India. Structures in this town date back to the 13th century, but it seems like nobody's lived there since the mid-19th century. During that period, everyone who had been there just up and disappeared. Local lore is scarce, but if you look closely, you can find some different stories about what happened. It's said that one day, all 1,000 villagers disappeared into thin air. Nobody knows where they went, or why, or even saw them leave. A whole village, gone overnight. Now, there are a lot of theories as to what happened, from insane tax increases to poisoned water supplies to real, actual curses. But if any of these were the case, you would think there would be a gradual exodus, right? How does an entire population of people disappear immediately without a trace? And why didn't anyone come in and use all the free real estate? Well, according to legend, the village chief cursed the land before everyone vanished. Said curse makes it impossible to live there, as anyone who settles down will die. That'll make it extra tough to repopulate this ghost town. To add in some extra spookiness, the Indian Paranormal Society claims that people spending the night there will hear disembodied voices, see apparitions, and potentially even feel inexplicable touch. So good luck to anybody trying to visit.
Coming in at number 3, we've got Mount Misery Road. That sounds promising now, doesn't it? It makes sense that a road called Mount Misery would be full of legends, hauntings, and other paranormal occurrences. In fact, it's considered one of the most haunted roads in the world. But whether or not you believe in any of the hype is up to you. The name Mount Misery came from the area's bad reputation. Nothing would grow there, and farmers had a hard time traversing the area due to its steep hills. That's a rough start for sure. But the legend grew over the years, with claims that the land had been cursed years before to
prevent anything from growing. Years down the line, it's said that a patient at a mental hospital managed to burn the whole institution down, and now her ghost haunts the road. Sightings of a lady in white are quite common, although nobody has managed to speak with her. Another ghost commonly cited is a police officer without a skull. So if you get pulled over, double check the officer's dome piece to make sure that you're dealing with a human being. Add in sightings of hellhounds and common technological malfunctions, and you've got a stretch of road best avoided at all costs. Coming in number 2, we've got the Sydney Harbour Bridge Tomb. A lot of major architectural accomplishments came at great human cost, especially back before lawsuits and labor law and workplace safety seminars were real things. However, this particular instance of human sacrifice happened a little closer to modernity than a lot of people would like to think. A part of the iconic Sydney skyline, which also includes the legendary Opera House, the Harbour Bridge was completed in 1928. During construction, the official death count was 16. However, it's thought that many more folks died while working on the construction site, many of whom were undocumented migrant workers. Apparently, at some point, 3 men fell into the brick pylons supporting the bridge. Because they were migrant workers, nobody really noticed that they were missing for quite a while. Then, by the time it was apparent that a few folks were now permanent fixtures in the bridge, it was too late to go back and get them. Construction continued, and these 3 workers remained inside the pylons, entombed underneath this bridge for ages. If this is true, folks are crossing this bridge every day with 3 skeletons sealed within. And finally, at number 1, we've got the Night Marchers. The ghosts of long-dead Hawaiian warriors, these walkers in darkness shouldn't be looked upon by mortal eyes. It's said that anyone who does lay eyes upon these warriors will be marked for death. They rise up from the ocean and their burial sites and march towards ancient battle sites. If you ever notice a procession coming closer to you, you're supposed to lie down in the street and stay motionless. If you show enough fear and deference to the marchers, they'll leave you be. Also, if you run into one of your ancestors who's in the procession and then they recognize you, they'll call out that you're theirs, and then you'll be safe too. However, if you're not lucky enough to meet either of these requirements, you might find yourself vaporized by a blast of fiery light. So keep an eye out if you need to wander around at night in Hawaii, lest you come across a procession of ancient warriors. Legends galore. No matter where you look, you'll always find some kind of tall tale or wild story. Some are newer than others, but they'll all go down in history eventually. Coming in at number 5, we've got a Nevadan escapade. This story comes from a self-proclaimed survivalist living in Nevada. They open up the tale with a bit of a disclaimer, saying that they never really believed in the paranormal before this happened. In fact, prior to experiencing this, they would have assumed that anything strange going on would likely be the result of government experiments and the like. There was absolutely no way they expected an experience like the one I'm about to summarize. So the survivalist had a couple weeks of vacation saved up and didn't want to let it roll over to the next year. Taking that time off, he didn't really know what to do with himself. After a day of doing nothing, he decided to go camping on his own, as none of his friends were able to take any time off. Away he went, packing some basic supplies and grabbing coffee and donuts on the way out. After setting up camp in the middle of nowhere, the survivalist decided to have a little vodka and do some target shooting. Following an encounter with a jackrabbit, he came across a freshly killed coyote. Seeing as hunting coyotes is relatively common practice in Nevada, he didn't think much of it, but he still saw the way the body was left as strange. Weird smell too. That evening, while scanning through some capped channels on his ham radio, the survivalist came across something odd. Knowing that there was military presence in the area, he wasn't too surprised to hear the sounds of gunfire coming through the speaker. However, these war game sounds were followed up by what he described as nails on a chalkboard and a blood-curdling scream. Immediately after hearing these noises, the radio crapped out. Uh-oh. Reassuring himself that whatever happened there was hundreds of miles away, he went to bed. The next day, while puttering about, he wandered into a fenced-off military area, letting him know that whatever those noises were last night, they were probably closer than he assumed. Exploring this area more, he came across a cave that piqued his interest. Heading inside, he didn't notice anything odd at first, but soon became attuned to a very particular rotting smell. The same smell he noticed when coming across the oddly killed coyote. This tipped something off in his head and he got the hell out of there. At that point, the survivalist was terrified. Returning to his camp, he found that it had been raided. Everything was torn up, tossed about, and emptied, and nothing was missing though. While checking on his equipment, he noticed that all of these sounds in the area had stopped, dead quiet as night fell. And that's when he saw it. A humanoid creature standing off to the side, looking straight at him with dark voids for eyes. Hell, it even looked like it cracked a little smile. The survivalist tried to shoot it, but his bullets didn't seem to do anything but piss it off, making it scream in an ungodly fashion. Seeing that his weapon wasn't doing much, he booked it out of there and found a crevice to hide out in until sunrise. And when the sun rose, he got the hell out of there, ASAP. Coming in at number 4, we've got the Forest Ranger. Being a forest ranger must be fascinating, right? out in the wilderness all day, every day, minimal human contact, keeping an eye on the local flora and fauna, occasionally taking part in rescues, maybe helping a lost hiker find their way, wearing a cool hat. What a life. Of course, it isn't all fun and games. There are plenty of harrowing situations one can find themselves in when deep in the forest. However, mythical monsters don't usually come up during job training, so you better watch out. Take this tale from a forest ranger somewhere in the States. While responding to a missing persons report, they found themselves in a tricky area of the hiking trail. At some point it splits, with one of the paths leading people deeper into the forest instead of back to the service area. Naturally, the ranger called for some backup, and about a half hour later his backup showed up. Ranger and backup head off into the woods, calling out for the missing person, but to no avail. And when they got to the split in the path, Mr. Backup disappeared too. Trying for a while to contact the missing backup on their walkie, the ranger got a little spooked. Then, when all hope seemed to be lost, he ran into someone matching the description of the original missing person. However, this individual didn't respond to anything the ranger said to them. The ranger took the person back to their truck and told them to wait in the back while he went to look for his backup again. At this point, his backup chimed in on the walkie, saying that he'd found the missing hiker at the bottom of a hill with a broken leg and would be returning with him soon, which didn't line up with what he had seen. The ranger went back to the truck and saw that it was empty, with the passenger door wide open and the cage inside bent out of shape. Apparently that kind of stuff had been happening for a while too. Folks hearing their neighbors calling out in the night when they knew their neighbors were on vacation, or perhaps hearing their dog barking outside when the dog was at the foot of their bed. Coming in at number 3, we've got a deep woods discovery. There's nothing quite like having your expectations subverted, yeah? I don't want to spoil too much of this story before I tell it, so here we go. I found this one in green text format, and it seems to be coming from a person living in a rural area. Every year, they find that hiking in the wooded area near their home is quite pleasant in the fall, so they head out to do just that. However, they seem to find some of the more overgrown areas unsettling. Makes sense, especially if you're far away from society at large. As they explore a little more, they notice something dive into the bushes, giving them a start. At that point, the hiker has had enough and decides to book it. There's something nearby though, and it seems to be following quite closely. Eventually, the hiker makes it to the end of the trail and realizes that they have to go back where they came from. After the experience they had, they're not looking forward to it. In the end, they do indeed buck up and head back to the top of the trail. When they get to the part where they saw something dive into the bushes, they realize that it wasn't a monster or anything sinister, but in fact a little girl. She calls out for help, but as the hiker gets closer, a strange feeling washes over him. It looks like the girl is hurt and can't walk on her own, but when the hiker gets close enough for the little girl to see him, she begins screaming bloody murder. Oh no. It's at this point that the hiker gives up all pretenses and eats the girl, taking her form. Bet you didn't see that one coming. Coming in at number 2, we've got the Moose Man. Let's take a quick trip to Alberta, except instead of seeing the mountains or hockey, we'll go looking for shape-shifting terrors. Hooray! There were tales circulating around for a while about some sort of centaur with moose features instead of horse ones, although many claim these to be patently false. That's not going to stop me from talking about it as if it were real though. This thing lived by the river and never got too close to human settlements. However, it would often kill and mutilate game animals to make them unusable. In fact, it's also said to have been involved in the killing and maiming of many men as well. Beyond the moose-centaur comparison, there isn't much to be said about the way this creature looks. It's huge, as all moose tend to be, and walks around with flesh hanging from its antlers. Like many creatures in the same vein, it reeks of something otherworldly and tends to make hideous noises when encountered. Whether the moose look is its only avatar or one of many forms, we may never know. And finally, at number 1, we've got the Roadrunner. Meep indeed. While walking his dog at around 10 p.m., our storyteller came across a couple dead rabbits accompanied by a horrid stench. Assuming it was just a fox or something, he moved right along. Soon after, his dog started acting super weird though. It wouldn't move at all and seemed to be staring at something off in the distance, eyes wide. Then, the smell came back. This time he couldn't quite place where it was coming from, but he'd heard enough stories about bad smells and evil vibes in the woods to know to be careful. He took his dog and got off the path, hiding in some tall grass to the side. That's when he saw it. Something almost indescribable. Gray skin, rotten flesh, a horrible, emaciated horse's head, limbs that only seemed to half work. Made him want to run away at full speed immediately, but that was a bad call with it so close by. Sneaking seemed to be the better choice. The man and his dog started creeping away and got about 50 feet. The creature was out of sight now and the man thought he could start running. But apparently the Roadrunner knew exactly where he was trying to sneak away to and was immediately on his tail. Thankfully, the sneaking gave this man and his dog a bit of a head start and they were off to the races. As they ran from this awful beast, the man could hear it breathing. It sounded like an overexcited child, happy to be running in the woods in search of something good. Thankfully, getting back to the jagged gravel path proved to be a challenge for the Roadrunner. Whatever was wrong with its limbs made it difficult to traverse the rocky terrain, and eventually it gave up, screaming all the while. The man hasn't seen the creature again, but that's no guarantee that it's not around. Shapeshifting isn't uncommon with these kinds of things. Well, how do you feel about the Wendigo now? Any better or worse than when we started? It's a fearsome class of beast, that's for sure.
In at number 5 we have Empire State Building Bermuda Triangle. We've all heard about the Bermuda Triangle. Also known as the Devil's Triangle, it is loosely defined as being a region in the western part of the North Atlantic Ocean. A number of aircraft and ships are said to have disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Since then, planes changed their flight path to avoid the triangle. Others avoid going anywhere near it altogether. But did you know New York has its own version of the Bermuda Triangle? It is located in Midtown, more specifically a large radius around the Empire State Building. Starting in 2008, drivers started to complain about the 5-block radius around the Empire State. Their cars would inexplicably die and refuse to start up again. It was almost every day, says Ronnie Yakubovich, manager of NYC Tire and Auto Care. He went on to explain that he would pick up the cars and tow them outside of the radius and they would suddenly start to work as normal. His best guess is that the radio signals from the broadcast beacon on the tower were disabling alarm systems in cars and preventing them from starting. But if that was so, why did this only start in 2008? The Empire State Building was opened in 1931, so why did this start so recently? I guess we'll never know what is causing the phenomenon. Maybe just avoid the area if you can. In at number 4, Super Rats of Hurricane Sandy. One New Yorker told the story of him and his roommates. They had lived peacefully in a 5th floor loft for years with barely a cockroach invading the space. Then, the winter after Hurricane Sandy, the noises began, scratching and scurrying. I walked into the kitchen one day and saw a rat the size of a small cat crawling across our food shelves, Kevin says. Traps and an exterminator proved ineffective. It was baffling that the rats would find their way to the 5th floor. Then the roommates read reports about rats fleeing inland from flooded subway tunnels after Hurricane Sandy. A theory was going around that the weaker rats were wiped out and the surviving rodents bred a new generation of tougher, meaner super rats. There are reports of super rats even today. Some businesses demand that the city steps in and does something as outside dining became more normal within the last year. The diners were being harassed by the giant rats. Many diners have had to leave due to the dangerous nature of the giant animals. They claimed the rats were getting increasingly hungry with the lack of tourism, leaving them with less to feed off on the streets. The city continues to claim that these super rats do not exist despite the number of sightings and photos of the giant rodents. Many live in fear that the rats might make their way into the apartments as they are harder to kill than the usual infestation. In at number 3 we have Cropsey. In the mid-90s, Ariel Abramowitz went to camp across from the notorious disused mental institution Willowbrook in Staten Island. She recalls counselors taking campers to an old building on the site, with something like blood smeared on the walls. They spooked them with tales of a boogeyman named Cropsey. Allegedly, he was a respected community member. He has a family and a child who he loved. One summer he sent his child to the local camp. His son was later confirmed to have died at the camp. This sent the man mad. He disappeared from his life. No one knew where he had gone, but before he left he vowed to get revenge on the other kids and campers. He was later found and taken to a mental hospital. The next time we would hear of him, he was described as a homicidal madman, an escaped mental patient with a hook for a hand who hunted children and dragged them back to the tunnel system that lay under the abandoned ruins of the old Seaview Hospital, a former tuberculosis sanitarium. Soon the urban legend would be unmasked as Andre Rand. Rand worked as a janitor at the Willowbrook State School on Staten Island, a place whose name alone has the power to frighten adults and children alike. The institution, built as a respite for children with intellectual disabilities, was revealed to be a living hell in the 1970s, although authorities wouldn't close the school until 1987. Rand had a long rap sheet of crimes against children. In 1983 he went to jail again after kidnapping a bus full of kids from the local YMCA and driving them to an airport. And though there wasn't enough physical evidence to charge him, police already suspected him in the disappearances of at least 4 other Staten Islanders. To this day, none of the bodies have been found. Rand's story and that of Cropsey continues to fascinate and horrify tri-state residents to this day. Coming in at number 2 we have Haunted Dakota. The Dakota building set the standard for Upper West Side apartment living, built at a time when the upper classes were only just becoming familiar with the concept of living in an apartment. It was known for for having famous artists as residents, and the board were very picky about who they allowed to live there. One of the most famous couples to live at the Dakota was John Lennon and his wife Yoko Ono. Years after John Lennon was shot dead in front of his Central Park West apartment building in the Dakota, his widow Yoko Ono saw his ghost sitting at his white piano. She claims he turned to her and said, "Don't be afraid, I'm still with you." When he was alive, Lennon himself claimed to have spotted a figure wandering the halls of the Dakota, whom he referred to as the Crying Lady Ghost. Other residents are said to have encountered the spectre of a little girl about 7 years old, smiling and laughing and greeting people in the hallways. The Dakota's original owner, Edward Clark, had an interest in the paranormal and would often host seances to communicate with the dead. The more you play with the paranormal, the more likely you are to experience paranormal activity in the future, says paranormal researcher. She believes that when people are murdered suddenly and violently, their spirits linger. In John Lennon's case, his life was cut short in his prime. He was only 40 years old. Someone like him was happy to be alive. He was working, he had a small child, he had unfinished business. It's a prime recipe for a classic haunting. And finally, in at number 1, we have mole people. There are around 700 miles of subway tracks underneath New York City. Did you know that the large sections of the track that isn't used is home to the mole people? Thousands of homeless people and families have created a community underground. The mole people are living under popular parts of town without the people who are walking above even knowing they are there. They travel under cover of darkness as not to be evicted from their underground homes. Ever since the Great Depression, there have been many homeless people in New York City. During the difficult period, people started using the subway tunnels as a place to live. The places where homeless people live are dangerous. Rodents and reptiles lurk through the tunnels. There are debris and other hazards in the dark, plus the darkness conceals criminals, and mole people are often the victims of attacks. Thieves even steal what little they have. The entrances to the subway tunnels are easily accessible by anyone who has the desire to venture into them. There are numerous entrances throughout the city. However, it is illegal to enter, and going into them can result in criminal charges. Just like any place that numerous people live, the mole people form communities. Most of them look after each other, but there is also a kind of hierarchy. Most of them are very territorial over the section of the tunnels where they live. After all, it is their home. There are couples and even families that live underground. The sad part is these people risk losing their kids if authorities find out they do not have a place to live. So the families living in the subway do their best to stay concealed. People are not the only ones living in the subway tunnels under New York City though. Many animals live beneath the streets. Some of the mole people even domesticate these animals and live with them. These animals keep them company in the very isolated and lonely place they call home. The mole people do anything they can to eat and obtain the things they need. It's difficult for them though. They have to wait until it's dark to emerge from their homes. If authorities see them, they risk getting in trouble. Throughout the years, the city has made efforts to clean sections of the subway tunnels. However, the task is so vast that many abandoned areas remain untouched, especially the parts of the system that are no longer in use. As the saying goes, out of sight, out of mind.
Coming in at number 5, we've got Biringan City. Lost mythical cities are a classic tale from El Dorado to Atlantis, but as you might know, some are more popular than others. Like, you definitely heard about the two I just mentioned, but have you ever heard of Biringan City though? Famed urban sprawl filled with shape-shifting people and gorgeous cathedrals? No? Well, let me tell you more then. This is a legendary place said to exist somewhere in the Samar province of the Philippines. It's invisible and sort of floats between a whole bunch of different places. The only way to see this resplendent place is to be invited in by the denizens, a race of shape-shifting beings who often take humanoid form known as Encantos. So while it is always there, only the chosen few can actually see it. Those lucky enough to catch a glimpse describe an incredibly beautiful place, jam-packed with spectacular architecture and breathtaking views. Apparently the beings that live there sometimes lure humans in and allow them to live in the city. These people will then never return to the human world. Usually, this means that the Encantos cast a spell on the human, put them into a trance, and prepare them to enter the city. It's also believed that the Bermuda Triangle could be another entrance into the famed city too. All those ships and planes that disappeared there could have very well made their way through a portal and found themselves in this mystical place. Now wouldn't that be a nice alternative to what we've assumed about the Bermuda Triangle for so long? It's not only the chosen ones who have caught glimpses of the city though. Apparently fishermen often see the silhouettes of the gorgeous buildings from out on the water. By the time they return to shore, they've disappeared. Some say this is just them seeing light pillars, a natural phenomenon, but the fishermen often are resolute about what they saw. Another interesting story comes from a delivery driver who was supposed to drop off a package meant for Biringan. When they arrived, they were told by locals that no such city existed, so someone must have made a mistake or was maybe pulling a prank. We may never know. Coming in number 4, we've got Hannah Krana. Aren't witches fun? I know they've got a bad rap, especially in many historical accounts, but come on! Casting spells and brewing potions? That's a blast and a half. Unfortunately, people tend to be burned or hanged for that kind of behavior back in the day. However, this particular witch from Connecticut didn't meet an untimely demise, nor was she run out of town for her magical practices. Lots of people assumed the worst about her though, and even suspected her of somehow being involved in her husband's death. See, Hannah Hovey, eventually given the more witchy name Hannah Krana, lived with her husband for most of her life. However, one day, her husband took a leisurely stroll and ended up dead at the bottom of a cliff. Locals came up with the idea that Hannah had somehow put a spell on him that made him dizzy and confused, resulting in his tumble. After that, there was no going back. Hannah was a witch, so she embraced this title with her whole heart. She would threaten neighbors with spells and hexes, often getting free things like pies and fish. She even had a familiar in the form of a rooster named Old Boreas. The day Old Boreas died, Hannah sensed that her time was coming too. She told a neighbor about her funeral arrangements. She wanted her coffin to be carried by hand to her place of rest, and refused to be buried before sundown. Then, the very next day, she died. Not wanting to lug a coffin by hand up a hill, the locals tried to drag it with a sled, but every time they did so, the coffin would fall off and slide right back down to where it started. They thought this was her influence from beyond the grave. So in the interest of not making her more mad, they carried Hannah Krana's coffin to the burial site and finished up just after sundown. Then when they returned to her home, they found it ablaze. This burial ordeal sealed her legacy as a witch for sure. Whether all this is true is hard to say, but you can visit her white gravestone and see if you sense any witchy energies. Good luck out there, and maybe bring a fresh pie as an offering. Coming at number 3, we've got the Bleeding Stone Curse. This legend dates back to ancient times, in which the citizens of Thessaloniki erected a stone to memorialize the thousands of citizens who were massacred by the Byzantine Emperor Theodosius. Now, it's said every year on the day of the massacre, the stone would bleed. Not wanting to be forced to face the consequences of his actions, Theodosius ordered the stone to be destroyed. This ended up making matters worse though. The area known as Hippodrome Square was cursed for ages after the stone was broken. Any building built in the area would fall, and businesses started there would fail. Nothing could succeed in the area thanks to the curse of the stone. This curse remained for a very long time, forcing people to acknowledge the history of the site lest they fall victim to it. Then, in 1978, an earthquake occurred. It caused a building near the square to collapse, resulting in the deaths of 29 people. After this, a new building was built in its place. Known as the Bili Building, it hosts the Thessaloniki Archives, which serves as a stand-in for the Bleeding Stone. These archives detail the massacre and the people it affected in great detail. This is thought to have lifted the curse, although if this building were to ever be destroyed, it could spell doom for those around it. Coming in at number 2, we've got Ashley, Kansas. We've talked about one missing city today, albeit one that could exist but is hidden away, but now we've got a much more doom and gloom themed tale of a town that is no more. Ashley, Kansas was supposedly once a rural town like any other, full of farmers and families trying to eke out a living in America's heartland. Try to find any record of it nowadays and you'll come up short though. As the story goes, Ashley was swallowed up by a massive earthquake, one that opened up a fissure in the ground large enough to sink the entire town. One day folks were living their lives and the next they had disappeared forever. Government officials showed up to see what was going on but found nothing but a fiery crack in the ground. A few days later they returned to find that the fissure had closed after a second earthquake, leaving no evidence behind. A town gone just like that. Pretty unbelievable, right? Well, folks who have looked into this tale, which admittedly originated from a creepypasta, have found that there is a lack of evidence that this ever happened. No reports from nearby towns can be found in the archives, and anything referring to an actual town called Ashley has yet to be dug up. Some will say that's all part of a cover-up operation though, which is a pretty classic urban legend / conspiracy theory defense. If a town did disappear like that, wouldn't more people know about it? Well, that's the thing. If the story were controlled at the time, who knows what we'd think. And finally at number 1, we've got the Charman. We'll round out today's list with a famous figure from Californian folklore. This burned, singed, charred, and altogether flash-fried individual has been roaming around in Ojai near the Camp Comfort County Park for years now. Apparently this humanoid figure, burned beyond recognition, will emerge from the woods and attack anyone brave enough to yell from the bridge nearby. The story behind this horrifying creature is a tragic one too. Apparently there was a father-son duo out in the area in 1948. A deadly fire was spreading throughout the trees and the father and son were trapped by the blaze. The father succumbed to the fire first, leaving the son to fend for himself. He yelled for help over and over and eventually was rescued, but not before sustaining serious injuries. When he was discovered, the son was completely unrecognizable and didn't want to be seen. So once he recovered, he escaped and returned to the woods, charred skin and all, to become the Charman. There are other versions of this story, but they all seem to point to an unfortunate fire and a permanently scarred individual. Coming in at number 5, we've got Boneless Boys. You may be familiar with the claim that vampires are shapeshifters. Depending on who you ask and what vampires they're familiar with, you'll get all sorts of different stories about men who turn into beasts. Bats are a popular figure, but there are also tales of cats, dogs, wolves, rats, and more. Hell, if you've seen Dracula 3D, you'll know that some might even transform into gigantic praying mantises and scuttle up the stairs to kill your dad. They're quite versatile vampires. But you might not know about another type of shapeshifting some folks say they have. One that makes them even more versatile than any beastly form could ever hope to be. That's right, I'm talking about the boneless vampire. What do you mean boneless? Well, I mean they literally have no bones. Now, I can't prove this, but tell me, have you ever seen a vampire's skeleton? Whenever they die, whether it be by stake or by fire, they disintegrate into dust or other similar vampire particles, right? They leave no bones behind because there are no bones. It's a revelation, I know. But they can still walk and talk like any other humanoid, but with the added benefit of vampire powers. Plus, this bonelessness means they're fantastically flexible, which works wonders in their seductive activities and their sneaking into homes to drink blood. Even if you lock your abode up tight, a vampire can contort its boneless form and make it through the tiniest of cracks. Keyholes? Not just for keys anymore. I bet you didn't expect me to lead with a legend like that, now did ya? Hopefully that sets the tone. Coming in at number 4, we've got the Sukuyan. A lot of folks look to European legends to find out about vampires, but they really do exist all around the world. By different names, sure, but they still suck blood and pass for people. One such fascinating bloodsucker is the Sukuyan from Jamaica. The creature takes on the form of a shriveled old lady by day. You might even see her at the market and offer her a helping hand. But if you knew what she did by moonlight, you'd take your helping hands elsewhere. A Sukuyan will shed her skin at night, becoming a blood-drinking fireball. This skinless apparition can then float around the community, drinking the blood of anyone unfortunate enough to become a target. After a long night of draining folks of their vital essences, the fireball returns home to its discarded skin. It can then don the loose organ like a suit and return to life as an old lady. With every use, the skin becomes more and more wrinkly, wear and tear and all that jazz. Usually the Sukuyan will do a pretty good job of hiding her skin after she's freed for the night because it's left pretty vulnerable. While flying around, nothing can really be done to protect the skin. So if you ever find some skin, do your best to mess with it. Some folks say that if you salt or pepper it, it'll cause her to experience extreme burning and itching upon return. Another thing you can do to combat a Sukuyan is scatter rice or salt on your doorstep. It won't protect anyone's blood, but it'll slow the monster down. Like so many other mythical demons, if it comes across a smattering of rice or salt, she'll be compelled to hunker down and count every last grain before leaving. This tends to take a while, leaving the beast exposed and distracted. Take that opportunity to beat her to death, or toss her in a vat of boiling oil. It might seem cruel to do that to what looks like an old lady, but hey, you gotta save your blood somehow. Coming in at number 3, we've got vampire pumpkins. Legends are weird, alright? And this one's no exception. I don't quite understand how this came to be a common conception, but it's well documented by the ethnologist Tadimir Vukanovic. Apparently, there was a long-standing belief in the Balkans that if you left a pumpkin or watermelon out for more than 10 days, it would become a vampire. That's right, the gourds would transform into humanoid bloodsuckers. I think I understand Akira Toriyama's vampire comic a little better now. Imagine that, leaving a pumpkin on your stoop for a solid fortnight after Halloween and waking up to an empty yard. Most folks would assume some vandals made off with it, planning to smash it with baseball bats or throw it off a building. But no, it actually just turned into a vampire and now you're gonna get seduced and bit. Great. If this is true, folks better get right on their composting habits. It's similar to the belief that any given object left outside overnight during a full moon will become a vampire. I think this legend originates from people being dumb with their belongings, but I might just be reaching. You can be sure that your produce is about to make a change if a drop of blood appears on its skin. Oh, and the pumpkin vampires can change back into pumpkins, so even if it doesn't disappear, you can be the proud owner of some cannibalistic vegetables. Coming in at number 2, we've got Jiangxi. Let's take a trip to China this time and learn about some of their bloody beasts. A popular one is the hopping vampire, also known as the Jiangxi. Usually appearing as a stiff corpse dressed in Qing Dynasty clothing, these undead beings hop around looking for life force to drain. Life force isn't specifically blood in this case, but the two line up just fine. They spring to and fro during the night, hoping to come across some hapless folks. And just like vampires from other cultures, they spend the day locked up in dark places like coffins and caves. They hop because they're corpses. Rigor mortis has long since set in, making it impossible for them to bend their limbs. So instead of walking, running, or any other sort of human locomotion, they can hop around as best they can. They're also an odd green-white tint, frequently attributed to mold from being buried so long. These vampires are a little less sexy than a lot of the other ones. There are a few ways to survive an encounter with the Jiangxi. You can write a spell in chicken's blood on a yellow piece of paper and stick it to their forehead. Or you can use a sword forged from Chinese coins that has been charged under moonlight. Apparently throwing sticky rice at one will draw the evil out. Maybe they were just hungry. Oh, and connecting this to the boneless bits, although I don't know if that really applies here, conventional wisdom says that a piece of wood could be installed at the bottom of a door to prevent Jiangxi from entering. It's always fun to connect those dots. And finally at number 1, we've got the Blood Countess. When discussing the origins of vampires, many folks look right to Vlad the Impaler. This Wallachian prince is more than likely the inspiration for Count Dracula's name, as he was a member of the Order of the Dragon. Being a member of this order gave him the surname Dracul, which is only one letter off from the name we know and fear today. But even though Vlad tended to be violent and steak happy, the real blood drainer was waiting in Hungary. Elizabeth Ballery was a countess well known for her brutal lifestyle. Legend says that she tortured and killed over 650 women throughout her life. In true vampiric fashion, she believed that bathing in blood of young girls would keep her young. She was going for a youthful appearance, not eternal life, but you can see how that might have influenced vampire lore. Ballery drained plenty of girls of their blood in order to keep herself young. This practice also seems to be a little more sadistic and fetishistic than Vlad's brutal display of slain enemies. Hold on, aren't some celebrities paying for young people blood infusions now? History has an eerie way of repeating itself, doesn't it? String up your garlic and bust out your mirrors. There are all sorts of additional vampire tidbits to fear now.
Coming in at number 5, we have the Expressionless. According to this very bizarre legend, a nameless woman arrived at the Cedar-Sinai Hospital back in June of 1972 wearing a bloodied white gown. Now what set this woman apart from the rest of the patients in the hospital was that she had a mannequin-like appearance, yet moved fluently like any normal person. Her face was devoid of facial features, and on top of all of that, the woman had a kitten inside of her mouth, which she pulled out before collapsing to the ground. Now, she was quickly rushed into a room and prepped for sedation, with the staff opting to restrain her just in case. However, when they attempted to inject her, the woman immediately fought back. She then rose from the bed and revealed razor-sharp teeth that were seemingly impossible to fit into her mouth. She then attacked one of the doctors, sinking her teeth firmly into his neck, killing him quickly. When authorities arrived, they couldn't restrain her, with the woman killing everyone in the hospital, with only one nurse surviving the onslaught, dubbing the woman the Expressionless. Since that day, there has never been a sighting of her, perhaps because she isn't real. What I don't understand is why she had a kitten in her mouth. That is the most bizarre part of the entire thing. Now, the origin behind this legend, it was uploaded on the internet, appearing on Creepypasta back in June of 2012. Coming in at number 4, we have Lavender Town Syndrome. This is a popular urban legend amongst gamers, specifically those who played Pokemon Red and Green in Japan. This legend began back in 1996 when there was an apparent peak in suicides and sickness in folks between the ages of 7 to 12 years old. Rumors began to spread that illness occurred in children who reached Lavender Town in Pokemon, with it being said that the town's theme music had extremely high-pitched frequencies that may have resulted in folks becoming sick or even taking their own lives. house. Due to this frequency, it is said that around 200 people took their own lives or developed illnesses and afflictions, with some complaining of severe headaches after listening to the music. The mass hysteria ultimately resulted in the programmers fixing the music to be at a lower frequency, and since then no complaints have been made. In Pokemon Gold, Silver and Crystal, the Lavender Town music was recomposed altogether to be happier, and the Pokemon Tower was demolished and replaced with the Kanto Radio Tower. The Lavender Town theme was also re-recorded for the 2017 Pokemon Go Halloween event. In at number 3, we have the disappearance of Ashley, Kansas. Now, this is a bizarre urban legend, but one of my favorites on this entire list. It is said that back in 1952, an anomalous incident occurred in the town of Ashley, Kansas. However, it should be noted that this isn't, nor has ever been, a real place. Sorry to burst your bubble. However, the legend states that back in 1952, an earthquake occurred in the middle of the night, resulting in strange happenings. Specifically, the town of Ashley, Kansas abruptly disappearing. When police went to investigate, they found nothing, only a smoldering burning fissure. It was said that the 679 residents of the town were missing, however, the search for them was called off after 12 days of searching. The legend also goes on to state that not long after, yet another earthquake occurred, and this time when the police went to investigate, the burning fissure was gone and the town was still nowhere to be seen. And that is all that is known about Ashley, Kansas, the town that supposedly disappeared overnight. Coming in at number 2, we have Slender Man. To quote the original Slender Man post on Something Awful, "We didn't want to go, we didn't want to kill them, but its persistent silence and outstretched arms horrified and comforted us at the same time." This is perhaps the most popular modern day legend on our list, with it crossing over into the mainstream with games and movies being made about this supernatural figure. Now, Slender Man originated as a creepypasta internet meme created by Something Awful forums user Eric Knudsen back in 2009. Slender is described as being incredibly tall, somewhere between 7 to 9 feet, as well as pale in complexion with an emaciated figure. He is sometimes portrayed with incomplete features such as empty eye sockets. He is also said to possess a handful of supernatural powers and abilities. He is said to be immortal, having lived for around 11,000 years without end, and any wounds inflicted on him instantly heal. Now, stories told about the supernatural character commonly feature him stalking, abducting, or traumatizing children. Now, outside of the internet, he has become an icon, with a prominent influence in popular culture, with video games being made about the figure, including Slender the 8 Pages and Slender the Arrival. However, things became very real with this legend back in 2014 when 2 girls attacked another girl and claimed to the courts that they did it for Slender Man, which is absolutely terrifying. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have the Russian sleep experiment. This urban legend emerged a few years back in 2010, so sorry to disappoint in advance, but this one is certainly not real, but that doesn't stop folks from speculating. Now, the legend itself recounts a supposed experiment that took place in the late 1940s in a Soviet test facility. According to the legend, 5 prisoners were kept in a sealed gas chamber with a continually administered airborne stimulant, which kept them awake for 30 consecutive days. Now, the prisoners volunteered for the experiment under the false promise that they would be released after the 30 days. For the first few days of the experiment, the prisoners behaved normally, chatting with one another and even talking to researchers through the one-way glass. However, over the subsequent days, things quickly turned much darker. After 9 days, one of the prisoners began screaming uncontrollably for hours on end, while the other prisoner seemingly had no reaction to the odd outburst. The man ultimately screamed for so long that his vocal cords burst, which makes me feel physically sick. I know this isn't real, but the idea of that happening is disgusting. Not long after, a second prisoner began screaming, while the others prevented the researchers from looking in by pasting torn book pages to the windows with their own feces. A few more days passed and things went silent, and after 15 days, the researchers decided to turn off the stimulant and enter the room. What they found was absolutely disgusting. One of the prisoners was deceased and the 4 remaining survivors had performed severe mutilation on themselves, tearing off their own flesh and removing their own organs.
Starting off this countdown, we have the Phantom Funeral Train. On April 19th, 1865, Abraham Lincoln's funeral train departed Washington, D.C. This was to transport his remains to Springfield, Illinois, where he was buried. The train made a couple of stops on the way for people to pay their respects to him. him. Now, legend goes that on April 19th of every year, the ghost train of Abe Lincoln can be seen traveling this route. A number of switchmen have claimed to see this train. In an interview, one switchman said he was at his post waiting for the Midnight Express when he saw this ghostly train pass by. Another worker claims that when the train passed, he saw some passengers aboard and they all looked ghostly and pale. Another claims to have seen Abe's coffin through the train's window. And lastly, according to the legend, when the train passes by, all watches and clocks in the area will randomly stop as the train passes. And if you guys are liking this video so far, then make sure to give it a big thumbs up because it really helps us out. In our fourth spot, we have the Headless Ghost. In October of 1889, a train conductor by the name of John Walsh was bringing the train along the Nickel Plate Railroad in Arcadia. While waiting for the signal to allow him to continue traveling on, he noticed that a section of the train cars had disconnected. While trying to reconnect the train, the other missing section came barreling towards him, smashing his head between the two cars. He was instantly killed. In January of 1890, it was said that an engineer had seen John's ghost. So now, legend goes that at night you can see John's headless ghost roaming the tracks, looking for his lost head. It is also said that he carries a lantern which he swings back and forth while he's on the tracks. Even train conductors have apparently seen this headless man while traveling these routes. Other passengers have seen the eerie glow of his lantern at night. Moving on to number 3, we have the ghost train. This is an urban legend from St. Louis, Saskatchewan. The legend surrounds a train conductor who one night got decapitated by a train. Some believe he fell on the tracks, others believe he was checking the tracks when a train reversed over him. Either way, this ghostly man and his ghostly train now haunt the area. According to the legend, sometimes at night you can see the lights of this ghost train traveling along the tracks. Some say it's a white light, others have seen a red light. A man named Edward Lucier claims he has seen this train. When he was younger, his father, mother, aunt, and uncle wanted to see this light. He and his cousin decided to follow them in their own vehicle to scare them. While they were all out there, they witnessed the blinding light of the train. Then it disappeared without a trace. Even the mayor claims to have seen the light. He said, and I quote, "It basically looks like a street light from a distance. That's a little brighter and gets a little dimmer, and there's a little red light that's sometimes seen on either side of it." Over the years, people have tried to debunk this legend, but still, many stand by what they have seen or heard. In our second spot, we have the Silver Pilen train, which means the silver arrow in Swedish. Basically, legend goes that one day a silver train showed up among the hundreds of green trains in Stockholm's metro system. Locals didn't like this train because of its raw look. It was also a different design than their standard train, and apparently it even looked a little bit dirtier on the inside. And that's when the legend of the Silver Arrow train was born. Basically, legend goes if you get on this train, you won't ever arrive at your station. Instead, you will travel the route endlessly for the rest of your life. Also, apparently, you only see this train after midnight. The passengers aboard the train are all dead. Another version says that the train only stops once every year. So for those looking to travel to just the next station, you're doomed. This legend has spooked so many people that when they see this train, they refuse to get on it. Also, people are gonna come for me and they're gonna be like, it's route, not route. Okay, I'm Canadian, so I say route. And in our number 1 spot, we have Kisaragi Station, aka the train station that doesn't exist. So this legend started after a series of posts were added on Japan's 2-channel message board. It was posted under a thread titled, "Post strange occurrences that have happened to you." It was then translated into English. So basically, the poster was riding a train late at night when she realized it was not going to any of her usual stops. Instead, it traveled for an hour without stopping. After finally stopping, she found herself at a place called Kisaragi Station. Hopefully I pronounced that right. But it was completely deserted. And nobody on the platform that she was posting on could find any information on this station. She contacted her family for help, but they couldn't find this station either. At this point, that was the last train of the night, and her phone was about to die. So she decided to walk back along the tracks where she came from. That's when strange things start to happen to her. Her last post said, and I quote, "My battery's almost run out. Things are getting strange, so I think I'm going to make a run for it. I'm going to make this my last post for now. After that post, she was never heard from again.
In at number 5 we have Puchin. The Puchin hail from southern Chile and is a creature from Mapuche mythology and Choloto mythology. The Puchin is described as a shape-shifting creature highly feared that can instantly change into animal form wherever it so desires. Throughout different stories it has often been described as a gigantic flying snake which produces strange whistling sounds, while its gaze could paralyze any victim it chooses, kind of like Medusa in that way, and permit it to suck its blood. In Chile, the word Puchin also designates to the common vampire bat, so some cryptozoologists believe that common vampire bat is the origin of the legend. However, some believe that the Puchin could be related to the chupacabra, something we'll be discussing later on. Spoiler alert. It is said that the only people who can defeat the Puchin are Mapuche medicine women. That was a mouthful. In at number 4 we have duendes. A duende, for those who don't know, is a creature from South America that originated from the phrase possessor of a house and was originally conceptualized as a mischievous spirit inhabiting a home. Now duendes appear to pop up in many cultures around the world. In Portugal the word is used to describe beings of a small stature wearing big hats whistling a mystical song while walking in the forest. It is said that they lure young girls and boys to the forest, causing them to lose their way home. However, in Latin America this differs slightly. Duendes are believed to be the helpers of people who got lost in the forest so they could find their way home. They are also known to be gnome-like creatures who live inside the walls of homes, especially the bedroom walls of young children. As you can tell, the legend differs from region to region, some believing they are the souls of infants who died before they could be baptized. Others simply portray them as malevolent spirits that hide in homes and wreak havoc. Regardless of that, they are nasty little suckers who cause problems wherever they go. Coming in at number 3, El Chupacabra. Also known as the Chupacabra, this is a goat sucker, a legendary creature that was first reported back in the mid-90s. The name itself comes from the animal's reported habit of attacking and drinking the blood of livestock, including goats. Now there is actually said to be 2 kinds of Chupacabra. One is a reptilian kind, the true Chupacabra, and a canine kind, who are also called blue dogs. The first known sightings and attacks occurred back in March of 1995 in Puerto Rico. 8 sheep were found dead, each drained of blood. Investigators found 3 strange puncture wounds in the chest of the animal. A few months later in August, an eyewitness, Madeline Tolentino, reported seeing the creature in the town of Canovanas, when as many as 150 farm animals and pets were reportedly killed by the creature. Jumping forward to 1975, similar killings in the town of Mocha were attributed to the vampire of Mocha. It was initially believed that these acts were committed by a satanic cult, but later more killings were reported around the island, and many farms reported loss of animal life. Each of the animals were reported to have had their body bled dry through a series of small incisions. Now, like I mentioned before, the most common description of the Chupacabra is that of a reptile-like creature, said to have leathery or scaly greenish-grey skin, and sharp spines or quills running down its back. The other popular description is that of a strange breed of wild dog. It is described as being hairless and has a pronounced spinal ridge, unusually pronounced eye sockets, fangs, and even claws. In at number 2, La Llorona. Hailing from Hispanic folklore, La Llorona, which I'm pronouncing correctly now after you guys yelled at me in a previous video, is also known as the Wailing Woman or even the Crier. This is a legend about a woman who drowned her children in a lake and now mourns their deaths for eternity, roaming South America as a ghost or apparition. The story itself goes as follows. The woman was unloved by her husband and one day she caught him with another woman. So as revenge she drowned her sons in a river in grief and anger, and then drowned herself after she realized what she did. She was ultimately refused entry into heaven, for obvious reasons, unless she found the souls of her 2 sons. So now legend states that she roams the earth, hunting for the souls of her sons, with her cries and wails luring in innocent victims. La Llorona kidnaps wandering children at night, mistaking them for her own. Folks who have claimed to have seen her say that she appears at night or in the late evening by rivers or lakes, wearing a white gown with a veil, and some believe that if you hear the cries of La Llorona you are marked for death. Now, one particular encounter went as follows. A boy and his family were sitting near a creek between Mora and Guadalajara in New Mexico when they saw the form of a tall, thin woman. She seemed to float over the water and end up the hill out of sight until returning a little later closer to them. The family had suspicions that she was La Llorona, so they went to the shore to see if there were footprints, and there were none. Creepy stuff. More interesting still, the earliest reference to La Llorona was actually in a sonnet written by Mexican poet Manuel Carpio in the late 1800s, where he identifies her as the ghost of a woman who was drowned by her husband. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have El Silbón. Hailing from Colombia as well as Venezuela, El Silbón, also known as the Whistler, is a legendary figure described as a lost soul. This tale originated in the 19th century, with the Whistler being described as the harbinger of death. According to the legend, a son kills his father after he returns home to find his father attacking his mother. This angered the boy, resulting in him killing his father. Another version is a tad more disconcerting and states that the son was a spoiled brat, and on one afternoon he demanded that his father hunt for a deer, his favourite meal. However, when his father did not find any deer and instead returned empty-handed, his son killed him and cut out his heart, cooking them for dinner. Following this, a mother grabbed the boy's grandfather, who then tied the boy to a tree and unleashed a vicious dog on him. As this was happening, his mother put a curse on the boy, which ultimately condemned him to wander the plains as a ghost, carrying a sack of bones on his back. Some versions of the story states that these bones are of his father, while others state that these are the bones of his victims. Now, the whistler is said to have a characteristic whistle that resembles the musical notes C, D, E, F, G, A, B in that order. It is said that when the whistling sounds close, there's no danger, but if the whistling is far away, it means the whistler is nearby. Very confusing, I know. It is also stated that hearing the whistler foretells one's own death, and in this situation the only thing that can save the victims is the sound of a barking dog. Many people from Venezuela have said that they have spotted the whistler, primarily in the summer. However, it is mainly on rainy days that the whistler wanders, hungry for death and eager to punish drunkards, womanizers, or even innocent victims. It is said that the whistler will suck the alcohol out of drunkards through their navel when it finds them alone, and it tears womanizers to pieces, removes their bones, and puts them in the sack where it keeps the remains of its father. Lovely stuff.
Coming in at number 5, we've got the Peace Picture. I love this story. Honestly, I had no idea that it came from Korea either. When I worked as a camp counselor, I would tell this on night hikes all the time, and let me tell you, it really scared some campers. There are a few different versions with different main characters and different setup scenarios, but the meat and potatoes all pretty much stay the same. Alright, so the legend goes a little something like this. A middle schooler is biking home with his friends and they come to a forest path. Our main character lives through the woods and his pals take a different route home. So the group splits up and the young lad cycles through the trees. As he's going along, something catches his eye. There's a Polaroid picture lying face down at the foot of a tree. He pulls off the path, hops off his bike, and notices that there's a broken bicycle behind the tree. Picking up the photo, he sees a cute girl smiling at the camera, flashing the peace sign. You know the one. He really likes the picture, so he pockets it and heads home. That night, the boy feels an overwhelming urge to look out the window. When he does, he notices a young girl standing in his yard, facing away from him. He calls out to her, but she doesn't react. Feeling strange, he heads downstairs and walks into the yard, but the girl is nowhere to be seen. The next day, he shows his friends the picture and tells them the story of the girl in his yard, but none of them seem to recognize her. They go about their day at school, and then it's time to go home. On the ride home, the boy keeps an eye out for the girl about town, but doesn't see anyone resembling her. He and his friends make it to the woods again and split up. Distracted, the boy pedals his way through the flora and fauna. Suddenly, he catches a glimpse of someone behind a tree and cranes his neck to see if it could be her. Unfortunately, this causes him to lose his focus and crash. He doesn't survive. Weeks later, another kid is wandering through the woods. They see a Polaroid photograph lying in the decomposing leaves. Picking the picture up, they see a really cute girl holding up 3 fingers. Thinking it's a nice photo, they pocket it and head right along. Creepy, right? There are many variants, with car wrecks instead of bike crashes and grown men instead of school children, but the peace sign evolving into a 3 with another victim stays the same. Coming in at number 4, we've got virgin ghosts. It's every frat boy from the 80s worst nightmare, dying a virgin. Apparently this fear crosses cultures too. Known in Korea as the Chonyo-guishin, they can be found all over the place. Folks say that you might run into a virgin ghost in abandoned buildings, hospitals, schools, bathrooms, cemeteries, and forests. So basically, anywhere you might have found a living virgin. They're characterized by their long dark hair that completely covers their face, and they're always wearing white clothing. Look behind that hair and you'll notice they look pretty bummed too. I suppose that comes with the title, huh? People say you'll know you're near one when the temperature drops suddenly and the wind changes direction. Chills are a common symptom too, but those kinda come with the previous 2. In Confucian Korean culture, it was a woman's role to serve her father, husband, and sons. If someone died before doing these things, she would be cursed to wander the earth forever. So if a woman was to die a virgin, she would become a Chonyo-guishin. This comes with a fair deal of bitterness. Often these ghosts will wander around the place where their former family lived, doing their best to cause problems for their good old relatives. Apparently erecting, pardon the pun, phallic statues could calm an angry virgin ghost down. This doesn't work, or if town council won't approve a long hard statue, you can always try to introduce the ghost to an equally single male. The male virgin ghost, or the Chongakuishin, is always looking for someone to marry to put their soul to rest. So if you find one virgin ghost, you'd best get to work finding another. Coming in at number 3, we've got dreaming of dead family. You would think that seeing a dead family member might be nice. You know, maybe they're here to give you some advice or warn you of impending danger, or maybe they're just showing up because they miss you. Aww. However, there's a South Korean urban legend that says dreaming of a dead loved one is bad news. Do your best to resist their lovely charm, alright? It's said that if you dream of a dead family member or friend, they're going to try and steal your soul. They'll call you towards them, and if you head on down and give them a hug, it's game over. This is especially common near water, apparently. If these dreams persist, it's best to look into why they're happening. It's likely that whoever's calling out to you thinks that you owe them something, or you're holding on to one of their belongings. To figure out for sure, people advise heading out to wherever they're buried to pay respects. That should take care of the potentially soul-stealing dreams, and if not, well, I don't know what to tell you. Keep avoiding hugs, I guess. Coming in at number 2, we've got dog-human hybrids. Stories of people hearing disembodied voices while walking alone have been around pretty much forever, but this particular legend explains the mysterious phenomenon in a pretty creepy way. Around the 1970s, all sorts of folks started telling tall tales of finding truly disturbing creatures late at night. While strolling along, they hear a voice. They look up, they look down, they look left, they look right, and nobody's around, so they resume walking, but the voice calls out again. It's talking to them. A little paranoid now, the person checks behind them and looks to see if anyone is leaning out of a window or something. No dice. Then a little dog runs up to them. Oh, what a cute little dog, they think. But then it speaks using language. And the person gets a good look at the four-legged creature, and oh god, it's got a human face. Anyone with unsoiled trousers at that point is a champion. These chimeric abominations are apparently quite common in Japanese and Korean folklore. It's said that someone who lives a sinful life will end up reincarnated as a half-dog, half-human monstrosity. Like, it would be cool to live the carefree life of a dog, but definitely not with a human head and intelligence. But considering my sinful modern lifestyle, I'm destined to become a dog man. What's a good name for one of those? And finally at number 1, we've got sesame seeds. I know what you're thinking. Keegan, you must be losing it. Sesame seeds aren't an urban legend, they're an edible plant byproduct, delicious on bagels and breads. But you see, I know sesame seeds are real. But there are plenty of legends concerning them in Korea. Remember when I warned all the trypophobes to skedaddle? Well, this is why. There are a few different stories about the ill effects of sesame seeds. One concerns a young woman taking a rejuvenating sesame seed bath. She learns of a lovely new skin treatment where you pour sesame seeds into your bath water. Supposedly this does wonders, leaving you extra youthful and glowing with super clean pores. So the woman decides to give it a try. She fills the tub, tosses in the seeds, and steps into the bath. Her mother, knowing how excited her daughter was to try this treatment, begins to worry after she doesn't come out of the bathroom for an hour. She knocks on the door but gets no answer. Fearing the worst, the mother forces the door open and stumbles in. Her daughter's unconscious in the tub with sesame seeds stuck on all of her grotesquely open pores. The seeds have taken root in her skin. Oh, yuck. The alternate telling of this tale involves sesame seed skin cream with similar terrifying results. I suppose the pimple-popping crowd might find this fascinating, but for most folks, this is hideously upsetting. Usually the victim in this sesame seed disaster is able to have all the seeds removed, but it is a time-consuming and painful process. However, leave the seeds too long and you might end up as a human planter. Imagine the roots growing deeper and deeper into your flesh. It's kind of like that watermelon seed urban legend where if you swallow a seed, you'll grow one of the bulbous fruits in your stomach.
Coming in at number 5, the Dog Boy. Hailing from Arkansas, the legend of the Dog Boy is one of the most infamous around the state. In 1954, Gerald Floyd Bettis, born to parents Floyd and Eileen Bettis in the Bettis house, during his early years, locals would say that the boy would catch dogs and cats and keep them in his home. However, what he was doing with these animals was absolutely horrific. However, what he was known for was the treatment of his parents. It was said that he imprisoned them in the attic, keeping them in there for years. According to reports, he abused them, but he wasn't arrested for it until after the death of his father and the continued abuse of his mother. He ultimately died in prison of an overdose, but since then people have claimed that paranormal goings-on have occurred at the former home. Flickering lights, strange noises, and moving objects have all been reported over the years. In some versions of the legend, his ghost walks on all fours and is shaggy like a dog, while in other versions he appears as a towering man donning a brown jacket and a bow tie. Coming in at number 4, we have Dudley Town. Dudley Town is an abandoned settlement in Connecticut in the United States, more commonly referred to today as ghost town. Since the mid-1920s, the land occupied by the village has been maintained. However, due to vandalism and trespassers, the site is no longer open to the public. Now, some history before we get into the nitty-gritty of this legend. Dudley Town was never an actual town. The name was actually given to the portion of Cornwall that included several members of the Dudley family. A local rumour has since circulated online that alleges that the founders of Dudley Town were descended from Edmund Dudley, an English nobleman who was beheaded for treason during the reign of Henry VIII. From that moment on, the Dudley family was placed under a curse which followed them to America. This curse is what was ultimately blamed for instances of crop failures and mental illness in the village. On top of that, Dudley Town visitors also report seeing paranormal phenomena such as an unnerving lack of wildlife, floating orbs of light, and sinister wolf-like black shadows. Not only that, but there is also said to be a mysterious group in the area called the Dark Forest Association that is said to police the grounds with militant force. What exactly is going on in Dudley Town? I don't really want to know. Coming in at number 3, we have the Alaska Triangle. Sometimes referred to as Alaska's Bermuda Triangle, this is a place in the untouched wilderness where people have reportedly been disappearing for years now. The triangle itself connects Anchorage, where I used to live, in the south to Juneau in the southeast panhandle, to Barrow, the northernmost town in Alaska. The area in between those points is unforgiving and a place not for the faint-hearted or inexperienced. Now, the area itself began to attract attention back in the 1970s, when a small plane carrying US House Majority Leader Hale Boggs, Alaska Congressman Nick Begich, and an aide Russell Brown vanished into thin air while flying from Anchorage to Juneau. For a month after the initial disappearance, planes, military aircraft, and dozens of boats scoured the area searching for the plane. However, nothing was ever discovered. No debris, no wreckage, nothing. Following the disappearance, more and more planes began to disappear, and on top of that, hikers also began to vanish into thin air. Since 1988, it is said that more than 16,000 people have disappeared in the Alaska Triangle, which is more than twice the national average. Now, whether this is something supernatural, extraterrestrial, or simply cruel weather conditions and harsh wilderness, we don't know. However, the disappearances have been blamed on everything from aliens to energy vortexes to shape-shifting demons. However, the likely explanation is the wilderness itself. It can be truly unforgiving. And Alaska is big, most of it is untouched wilderness. Lots of bears to eat ya. Coming in at number 2, we have the Alice killings. To this very day, the Alice killings remain one of the most bizarre and unsolvable serial killings in Japan's history. Between the years of 1999 to 2005, a series of killings supposedly took place. Killings that were completely different and unrelated except for one common element, a calling card that the killer left behind each time. He would leave behind a playing card, which varied from killing to killing. It would be left at each scene in an obvious location, and on the card would read Alice, written in the victim's blood. According to the legend, the first victim of Alice killings was Sasaki Megumi. She was a 29-year-old restaurant owner who one day decided to walk home from a friend's house, seeing as she lived only a block away. Several people offered her a ride home, but she refused. She was seen leaving the party in the early hours of the morning. However, the next time she would be seen, she wouldn't be alive. The next morning, a couple walking in the woods discovered her body. She was supposedly torn apart, with the couple instantly calling the police. Inside the mouth of Megumi was a playing card, the Jack of Spades, which had the word Alice written on it. At the scene, there was absolutely no prints discovered, only vomit, which the woman from the couple admitted was hers. The next victim was said to be Yamane Akio. He was a known singer in a band who was abducted from his apartment on February 11, 2001. His bandmates were the last to see him alive, with a missing persons report being filed within days. On the home security footage, a hooded figure was seen entering through a side door and leaving with a large garbage bag that bulged strangely. The person in the recording was never found or identified, but it is believed to be the same killer because, like last time, at the scene of the crime an Alice card was discovered, a king of diamonds clutched in his hands. However, in a bizarre turn of events in 2005, a Spanish serial killer was jailed for the murder of 6 people, and it was said that he would leave playing cards on the corpses of each victim as well. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have Cropsey. Now, this legend is incredibly bizarre because it ultimately turned out to be true, and there is nothing scarier than a true urban legend. Cropsey began as an urban legend, the boogeyman of Staten Island in New York City. It was rumored that this was a homicidal madman, a person who had escaped from a mental hospital who had a hook for a hand. He was said to hunt down children, drag them back to his tunnel system which lay under an abandoned hospital, and then kill them. Parents would use Cropsey to frighten their children into being good and staying close to home. He could be anywhere, so you better behave. However, parents didn't think too much of it because after all, Cropsey was just a mere legend, right? The legend continued to spiral, with the story even being turned into a movie in the 1980s called The Burning, which follows a man named George Cropsey who goes insane after a prank leaves him horribly disfigured. However, things went from bad to worse in Staten Island when Cropsey became a reality. The boogeyman came to life in the form of Andre Rand, a homicidal madman. Rand worked as a janitor at the Willowbrook School on Staten Island, a place which was said to be horrifically cruel to its students. The school was built as a respite for children with disabilities. However, after it was revealed to be a living hell, it would close its doors in 1987. After its closure, janitor Andre Rand would continue living on the grounds and was suspected of kidnapping several children. However, despite this never being proven to be true, he was found guilty of the crime, specifically one kidnapping in 1988 and one again in 2004. The legend became so infamous across the state that a movie was made about the story and Andre Rand, simply called Cropsey.
Coming in at number 5, we've got the Lotus Pond. Across all cultures, bodies of water are considered scary in some way or another. Ships have sunk, people have drowned, bad weather has brewed, etc., etc. There's a certain mysticism to water, and we as human beings are fascinated by it. Of course, water on its own can't be scary. We've got to add something else to the mix. How about water plus adultery plus murder? Everyone's got to be afraid of at least one of those things. All classic themes. So here is the tale of the Lotus Pond. One day, a young woman was waiting for her boyfriend by a lotus pond. As she waited and waited, she got more impatient. He was making her wait, the bastard. After a while, she decided to look around and see if he had maybe been waiting for her at the wrong spot. During her search, she discovered something quite awful. Her lover was away loving someone else. As one might imagine, she did not take this news well. In a fit of sorrow, she threw herself into the lotus pond and drowned. Nobody knows what happened to her boyfriend, but I think it's safe to assume that the next time he walked by the pond, her spirit dragged him into the murky water. These days, it's said that if a couple plans to meet by the lotus pond, they'd better be very careful. The ghost of the girl will call out to any boy nearby, and if he even so much as looks towards the water, he'll be drowned. And that's what you get for even looking, you dirty dog. Now, the Lotus Pond has such a bad reputation that many folks refuse to go near it. And if you do decide that it would be a great spot for a picnic, you'd better bring your horse blinders. If you hear a girl calling out near this pond, don't respond, don't look, hell, don't even turn towards the sounds, unless you really, really like chilling below the water. Coming in at number 4, we've got the Poor, Poor Maid. Who's ready for some more adulterous urban legends? So this one's a little more macabre than the jilted pond dweller. This story comes from one of the preeminent Chinese supernatural writers, Gan Bao. Apparently his father was a bit of a womanizer and had maintained a long-running affair with one of the family's maids. This didn't sit well with Gan's mother, who begrudgingly allowed it to happen for years. However, when the father died, she decided to take revenge. The family had a tomb made for Bao's dad, meant to eventually house the mother as well, but when old Daddy-O was buried, the mother also had the maid buried with him, alive. That's some hardcore revenge right there, don't you think? For years, the maid remained underground in the tomb, unbeknownst to anyone other than the mother. Then, 10 years after the death of the father, the mother joined him in the afterlife. Gan Bao had the tomb opened up so they could place her body there as well, and came across an unpleasant surprise. Firstly, he never knew that his mother had the maid buried alive, so there's that little shock to start us off. But amazingly, she was still alive. Emaciated and weak for sure, but alive nonetheless. She was nursed back to relative health and questioned about her survival tactics. Had she been crawling out for sustenance and then returning to the tomb out of some self-flagellating guilt? Had she foraged for grubs and wastewater? In the end, the only explanation she could give was that the ghost of the father had brought her all she needed to survive for years. I suppose he felt bad that his wife had punished this young worker in such a horrible way. Nobody has seen any ghosts walking around with food and water near the tomb since, but folks definitely keep an eye out just in case. Coming in at number 3, we've got the last bus. In the same way that fears related to water and adultery cut across all cultures, it seems that late night public transit has a similar legacy. And really, why wouldn't it? Being in an enclosed space that is difficult to immediately exit late at night, traversing potentially unfamiliar terrain is fertile ground for horrifying happenings. And just such a happening makes up the bones of this urban legend. In the mid-90s, a bus was heading to Beijing's Fragrant Hills. As it trucked along, 2 men attempted to flag it down. This was odd, considering that they were not at a bus stop, but the driver was feeling generous that day. Turns out there were 3 men, 2 of which wore traditional ancient robes, and 1 more who was being held up by the other 2. As the bus rolled along, it slowly emptied until there were only 2 passengers left, not counting the 3 latecomers. A young man and an old woman both sat there looking at these pale passengers. Suddenly, the old woman accused the young man of stealing her wallet and demanded that the bus driver let them off so they could take this matter to the police. When they got off, the man was furious. Not only had she falsely accused him of committing a crime, she had also had them get off in the middle of nowhere. Not even a police station was nearby. However, she had a good reason to cry wolf. She'd noticed something nobody else had. The 3 men had no legs. They'd been floating at the height of standing men and therefore must have been ghosts. Who knows what might have happened if they stayed on that late night bus with the 3 phantoms. Coming in at number 2, we've got Single Braid Road. What could be a reference to the shape of the road is actually a morbid description of a terrible death that supposedly occurred here. Let this be a lesson to you all. Don't jump from trains. Okay, I'll explain. Way back when, it said that there was a young couple. The man had all of his paperwork sorted out, but the woman did not. She, being an illegal immigrant, was living a life a little on the edge. Partway through the journey, some police officers boarded the train in order to check everyone's passports and such. Realizing this would not end well for her, the young woman decided to hop off the train. Unfortunately, she had done her hair in a very structurally sound style that day, a single long braid. When she jumped out, her hair got caught in the window, ripping her scalp from her head and taking her face along with it. After having most of the skin on her head removed, she crawled her way to Single Braid Road and died there. Gruesome, right? Well, the story doesn't end there. Apparently, if you head down Single Braid Road, you might come across a young woman with a long braid. Only men can see her, supposedly. If you approach her, she'll turn towards you and reveal that she lacks any facial features. I'll leave you to imagine what might happen next. And finally, at number 1, we've got the Suicide Shopping Center. Look, I get it. Sometimes malls make me want to hop over the guardrail and into the fountain below. We've all been there. However, so many self-inflicted deaths have occurred at this shopping center, folks are starting to get suspicious. Since it opened in 2004, over a dozen folks have committed suicide outside of Liwan Plaza. Some say there's a mysterious presence that might give the unfortunate souls a little push. These claims are backed up by a variety of strange discoveries that occurred during the building of said plaza. See, while they were developing the land, 8 empty coffins were discovered buried below. They did their best to work around this seemingly cursed discovery, first by constructing the building to appear octagonal and then by contacting a Taoist priest. When the holy man arrived, he let the others know that the coffins were meant to prevent evil from spreading in that area. The thing is, the coffins can't do that job if they're removed in the process of building a shopping center. Uh-oh. Seems that the strange noises and unfortunate deaths tended to drive customers away. It's too bad, isn't it? My goodness, what do you think? Is there any truth to these tales, or are they simply overblown misunderstandings? Have you heard any of these before? What Chinese urban legend haunts you the most? Make sure you let me know down in the comments. Speaking of comments, let's take a look at some of your more incidental ones from the top 5 scary space horror movies. Marcus Aurelius says, Event Horizon needs the cut footage restored. Good movie to begin with, I'd love to see more of the story fleshed out. Pardon the pun. No need to apologize for your puns here, friend. Otherwise, I totally agree with your statement. Apparently, it's quite the challenge to restore that missing footage though. Maybe someday. Christmas Lore says, space and horror mixed together, my favorite kind of movies. It's usually really great, or complete failures, one or the other, no middle ground. It's sad the genre is so scarce. Alien Saga eclipsed so many other great movies. I think that part of the reason space horror is so rare is kind of thanks to the Alien Saga. So many people try to emulate it, and any space horror tends to draw a lot of unrealistic comparisons to a classic. Brent Wood says, a list I finally agreed with all 5 choices. Ah, wonderful. I finally achieved the Brent Wood 5. Now I can retire and live out the rest of my days in peace. Wharfrat says Life Force. Matilda May, that's all I need to say. Heyo. And Alex Colley says, are you wearing your pajamas? I mean, any clothes could be pajamas. That's all I have to say on that. That's all the time we have for today. Before I kidnap a grizzly bear cub, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe for more worldwide wickedness. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Fears and stories that involve a more primal fear. Nope. Wait, why'd I say fear twice? Oh, whoops. Morbid description of a terrible death that actually, whoop. Why can't I speak in a sentence? Apparently it's quite, undermine the whole world. Into the murky water. These days it's said that,